In this video, we will be starting at around line 2780. Wiglaf and Beowulf, they have defeated the dragon. It is no more. However, the dragon did sink its fangs into Beowulf's neck, and so he is dying from that wound. He has reflected on his time as a king, and his last request is to see some of the treasure. So Wiglaf has gone down to the dragon's lair to collect some of the treasure for Beowulf. And we found out that while it was great looking treasure and expensive at one point, a lot of it now has corroded and rusted away. Again, we are starting at around line 2780 with the stanza that begins with Wiglaf went quickly. Wiglaf went quickly, keen to get back, excited by the treasure. Anxiety weighed on his brave heart. He was hoping he would find the leader of the gates alive, where he had left him helpless earlier on the open ground. So he came to the place, carrying the treasure, and found his lord bleeding profusely, his life at an end. Again he began to swab his body. The beginnings of an utterance broke out from the king's breast cage. The old lord gazed sadly at the gold. To the everlasting Lord of all, to the King of glory, I give thanks that I behold this treasure here in front of me, that I have been allowed to leave my people so well endowed on the day I die. Now that I have bartered my last breath to own this fortune, it is up to you to look after their needs. Here, if you did not catch it, he is basically bequeathing the kingdom to Wiglaf, saying, Wiglaf, you are going to be the next king of the gates. I can hold out no longer. Order my troop to construct a barrow on the headland on the coast after my pyre has cooled. It will loom on the horizon at Hronesness and be a reminder among my people, so that in coming times crews under sail will call it Beowulf's Barrow as they steer ships across the wide and shrouded waters. He's giving last-minute instructions here to Wiglaf before he dies. So he says, Wiglaf, you're going to be the next king of the gates. Then he talks about how he wants to be buried. If we think back to the background notes, we talked about the treasure of Sutton Hoo and how they had found the burial mounds there that had remained intact all of these years. And this is what Beowulf is talking about building for himself. He talks about how there's this cliff and next to this area of water called Hronesness, which means Cape of the Whale. So we know it's on the sea. And he says that's where he wants his pyre to be built. So they're going to burn his body, and then they're going to put his body and treasure inside the burial mound, just very similar to Sutton Hoo, and create that burial mound there. So that way when ships go by this cliff, they can look up and see his burial mound. Be like, oh, there's Beowulf's barrow. That was one good king. So he's given his funeral arrangements essentially to Wiglaf here. Then the king in his great-heartedness unclasped the collar of gold from his neck and gave it to the young thane, telling him to use it and the war shirt and the gilded helmet well. You are the last of us, the only one left of the Wegmundings. Fate swept us away, sent my whole brave high-born clan to their final doom. Now I must follow them. That was the warrior's last word. So Beowulf dies here. He had no more to confide. The furious heat of the pyre would assail him. His soul fled from his breast to its destined place among the steadfast ones. It was hard then on the young hero, having to watch the one he held so dear there on the ground, going through his death agony. The dragon from under earth, his nightmarish destroyer, lay destroyed as well, utterly without life. No longer would his snake folds ply themselves to safeguard hidden gold. Hard-edged blades, hammered out and keenly filed, had finished him, so that the sky roamer lay there rigid, brought low beside the treasure lodge. Never again would he glitter and glide and show himself off in midnight air. Exulting in his riches, he fell to earth through the battle-strength in Beowulf's arm. There were few indeed, as far as I've heard, big and brave as they may have been, few who would have held out if they had had to face the outpourings of that poison breather, or gone foraging on the ring-hall floor and found the deep barrow dweller on guard and awake. The treasure had been won, bought, and paid for by Beowulf's death. Both had reached the end of the road through the life they had been lent. Before long, the battle dodgers abandoned the wood, the ones who had let down their lord earlier, the tail turners, 10 of them together. When he needed them most, they had made off. Now they were ashamed and came behind shields and their battle outfits to where the old man lay. They watched Wiglaf sitting worn out, a comrade shoulder to shoulder with his lord, trying in vain to bring him round with water. Much as he wanted to, there was no way he could preserve his lord's life on earth or alter in the least the Almighty's will. What God judged right would rule what happened to every man, as it does to this day. Then a stern rebuke was bound to come from the young warrior to the ones who had been cowards. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke disdainfully and in disappointment. Anyone ready to admit the truth will surely realize that the Lord of Men who showered you with gifts and gave you the armor you are standing in, when he would distribute helmets and mail shirts to men on the mead benches, a prince treating his thanes in hall to the best he could find, far or near, was throwing weapons uselessly away. It would be a sad waste when the war broke out. Beowulf had little cause to brag about his armed guard. Yet God, who ordains who wins or loses, allowed him to strike with his own blade when bravery was needed. There was little I could do to protect his life in the heat of the fray, yet I found new strength welling up when I went to help him. Then my sword connected, and the deadly assaults of our foe grew weaker. The fire coursed less strongly from his head. But when the worst happened, too few rallied around the prince. So it is goodbye now to all you know and love on your home ground, the open-handedness, the giving of war swords. Every one of you with freeholds of land, our whole nation will be dispossessed once princes from beyond get tidings of how you turned and fled and disgraced yourselves. A warrior will sooner die than live a life of shame. We know this book foreshadows a lot and kind of spells out for us people's futures. And once again, we have the future of the Gates spelled out here for us. Because they were cowards and did not help Beowulf, that is their legacy. Remember, you are who your family was, and now their people group is going to be known as cowards, and they're going to be invaded, all because they were cowardly, did not help Beowulf, all except for Wiglaf, of course. And Wiglaf says there, a warrior will sooner die than live a life of shame. Then he ordered the outcome of the fight to be reported to those camped on the ridge, that crowd of retainers who had sat all morning, sad at heart, shield bearers wondering about the man they loved. Would this day be his last, or would he return? He told the truth and did not balk, the rider who bore news to the cliff top. He addressed them all. Now the people's pride and love, the Lord of the Gates, is laid on his deathbed, brought down by the dragon's attack. Beside him lies the bane of his life, dead from knife wounds. There was no way Beowulf could manage to get the better of the monster with his sword. Wiglaf sits at Beowulf's side, the son of Weohstan, the living warrior watching by the dead, keeping weary vigil, holding awake for the loved and the loathed. Now war is looming over our nation. Soon it will be known to Franks and Frisians far and wide that the king is gone. Beowulf's death is now being reported to all of the Gate people. And with this report, once again, they're saying, now war is looming. Now that Beowulf is gone, people are going to invade us. They're going to want to take our people group over. They're going to want to slaughter us, enslave us, take our treasure. We're doomed now. We are going to skip the next page, next 2 pages really, and you're going to be looking for line 3000. Around line 3000, that stanza begins with, so this bad blood. So this bad blood between us and the Swedes, this vicious feud, I am convinced, is abound to revive. They will cross our borders and attack in force when they find out that Beowulf is dead. In days gone by, when our warriors fell and we went undefended, he kept our coffers and our kingdom safe. He worked for the people, but as well as that, he behaved like a hero. We must hurry now to take a last look at the king and launch him, lord and lavisher of rings, on the funeral road. His royal power will melt no small amount of gold. Heaped there in a hoard, it was bought at a heavy cost. And that pile of rings he paid for at the end with his own life will go up with the flame, be furled in fire. Treasure no follower will wear in his memory, nor lovely woman link and attach as a torque around her neck. But often, repeatedly, on the path of exile, they shall walk bereft, bowed under woe, now that their leader's laugh is silenced, high spirits quenched. We find out here that this dragon's treasure is going to be burned along with Beowulf's body. Many a spear, dawn cold to the touch, will be taken down and waved on high. The swept harp won't waken warriors, but the raven winging darkly over the doomed will have news, tidings for the eagle of how he hawked and ate, how the wolf and he made short work of the dead. Such was the drift of the dire report the gallant man delivered. He got little wrong in what he told and predicted. The whole troop rose in tears. They took their way to the uncanny scene under Ernanus. There on the sand where his soul had left him, they found him at last, their ring-giver from days gone by. The great man had breathed his last. Beowulf the king had indeed met with a marvelous death. But what they saw first was far stranger. The serpent on the ground, gruesome and vile, lying facing him. The fire dragon was scarcely burnt, scorched all colors. From head to tail, his entire length was 50 feet. It tells us here how big that dragon was. Okay, it's 50 feet long, so envision that in your minds. It's not quite as magnificent as perhaps you were thinking, but it was still a good size monster to kill with its talons and tough scales and all of that. He had shimmered forth on the night air once, then winged back down to his den, but death owned him now. He would never enter his earth gallery again. Beside him stood pitchers and piled up dishes, silent flagons, precious swords eaten through with rust, ranged as they'd been while they waited their 1,000 winters underground. We find out there why that treasure was so rusty. It had been underground for about 1,000 years. So yeah, I would think it is rusty and corroding at that point. That huge cache, gold inherited from an ancient race, was under a spell, which meant no one was ever permitted to enter the ring hall unless God himself, mankind's keeper, true king of triumphs, allowed some person pleasing to him, and in his eyes worthy, to open the hoard. What came about brought to nothing the hopes of the one who had wrongly hidden riches under the rock face. First the dragon slew that man among men, who in turn made fierce amends and settled the feud. Famous for his deeds a warrior may be, but it remains a mystery where his life will end, when he may no longer dwell in the mead hall among his own. So it was with Beowulf when he faced the cruelty and cunning of the mound guard. He himself was ignorant of how his departure from the world would happen. The high-born chiefs who had buried the treasure declared it until doomsday so accursed that whoever robbed it would be guilty of wrong and grimly punished for their transgression, hasped in hell bonds in heathen shrines. Yet Beowulf's gaze at the gold treasure when he first saw it had not been selfish. Wiglaf, son of Weohstan, spoke. Often when one man follows his own will, many are hurt. Wiglaf here is talking about Beowulf, okay? And he's hinting at the fact that Beowulf's actions were selfish, that Beowulf's pride, his hubris, Hubris, his hubris, right, led to not only his own downfall, but his people group, the Gate's downfall as well. Look again at that line. Often when one man follows his own will, many are hurt, which is exactly what happened here. This happened to us. Nothing we advised could ever convince the prince we loved, our land's guardian, not to vex the custodian of the gold. Let him lie where he was long accustomed, lurk there under earth until the end of the world. He held to his high destiny. The hoard is laid bare, but at a grave cost. It was too cruel a fate that forced the king to that encounter. I had been inside and seen everything amassed in the vault. I managed to enter, although no great welcome awaited me under the earth wall. I quickly gathered up a huge pile of the priceless treasures hand-picked from the hoard and carried them here where the king could see them. He was still himself, alive, aware, and in spite of his weakness, he had many requests. So he's recapping here, once again, what happened as Beowulf lay there dying in the dragon's lair. He wanted me to greet you and order the building of a barrow that would crown the site of his pyre, serve as his memorial in a commanding position, since of all men to have lived and thrived and lorded it on earth, his worth and due as a warrior were the greatest. Now let us again go quickly and feast our eyes on that amazing fortune heaped under the wall. I will show the way and take you close to those coffers packed with rings and bars of gold. Let a bier be made and got ready quickly when we come out, and then bring the body to our Lord, the man we loved, to where he will lodge for a long time in the care of the Almighty." Then Weohstan's son, stalwart to the end, had orders given to owners of dwellings, many people of importance in the land, to fetch wood from far and wide for the good man's pyre. So they start collecting firewood and building up this massive pyre to lay Beowulf's body on to be burned. "Now shall flame consume our leader in battle, the blaze darken round him who stood his ground in the steel hail, when the arrow storm shot from bowstrings pelted the shield wall. The shaft hit home. Feather-fledged, it finned the barb in flight. Next, the wise son of Weohstan called from among the king's thanes a group of 7. He selected the best and entered with them, the 8th of their number. Under the god-cursed roof, one raised a lighted torch and led the way. No lots were cast for who should loot the hoard, for it was obvious to them that every bit of it lay unprotected within the vault, there for the taking. It was no trouble to hurry to work and haul out the priceless store. They pitched the dragon over the cliff top, let tides flow and backwash, take the treasure minder. Then coiled gold was loaded on a cart in great abundance, and the gray-haired leader, the prince on his bier, borne to Hronesness. Here, Wiglaf leads these other men, this group of 7, so him as the 8th, down into the dragon's lair to collect the treasure to then be burned and buried with Beowulf. And it tells us the fate of the dragon. We already knew the dragon was dead, but they also roll the dragon off a cliff into the sea. Why they don't use it for food or take the scales off of it and use it for their weapons, I do not know. That seems like it would have been a smart thing to do, but instead they just roll the body off into the sea. The gate people built a pyre for Beowulf, stacked and decked it until it stood 4 square, hung with helmets, heavy war shields, and shining armor, just as he had ordered. Then his warriors laid him in the middle of it, mourning a lord far famed and beloved. On a height they kindled the hugest of all funeral fires. Fumes of wood smoke billowed darkly up. The blaze roared and drowned out their weeping. Wind died down, and flames wrought havoc in the hot bone house, burning it to the core. They were disconsolate and wailed aloud for their lord's decease. A gate woman, too, sang out in grief. With hair bound up, she unburdened herself of her worst fears, a wild litany of nightmare and lament. Her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Heaven swallowed the smoke. Again, we have the sense of foreboding, of foreshadowing of what is to come for the gate people when this woman sings a song about her nation invaded, enemies on the rampage, bodies in piles, slavery and abasement. Now that Beowulf is dead, nothing good awaits the gate people. Then the gate people began to construct a mound on the headland, high and imposing, a marker that sailors could see from far away. And in 10 days, they had done the work. Okay, so they build Beowulf's burial mound now. It was their hero's memorial, what remained from the fire they housed inside it, behind a wall as worthy of him as their workmanship could make it. And they buried torques in the barrow, and jewels, and a trove of such things as trespassing men had once dared to drag from the hoard. They let the ground keep that ancestral treasure, gold under gravel gone to earth, as useless to men now as it ever was. And so they pile treasure inside of his burial mound as well. Just like Sutton Hoo from the background notes. Then 12 warriors rode around the tomb, chieftains' sons, champions in battle, all of them distraught, chanting in dirges, mourning his loss as a man and a king. They extolled his heroic nature and exploits and gave thanks for his greatness, which was the proper thing. For a man should praise a prince whom he holds dear and cherish his memory when that moment comes when he has to be convoyed from his bodily home. So the gate people, his hearth companions, sorrowed for the lord who had been laid low. They said that of all the kings upon the earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to win fame. At the end here, Beowulf, he is remembered not as a warrior, but as a king. They don't list all of his great qualities of a warrior or list out his resume of all of the monsters he destroyed, but rather they list out all of his positive qualities as a king. In the last 3 lines there, it says They said that of all the kings upon the earth, he was the man most gracious and fair-minded, kindest to his people, and keenest to wear fame. So gracious, fair-minded, kindest, most eager to win fame. Even though his death has left them open for invasion and slaughter, they're still remembering the positive qualities of their king at the end of his life. And that is the end of Beowulf.